My sister claimed I was mentally unstable for not sponsoring her lavish lifestyle. The first time I ever said no to Camille felt like trying to unlearn muscle memory. My thumb hovered over the phone screen for far longer than necessary, reading her text, the familiar sugar-dipped venom she had mastered over the years, asking for another small loan. $6,000 this time. For what? She didn't say. She rarely did. It was always some vague crisis wrapped in melodrama, crafted to pull on the strings of my dutiful guilt. Rent, car repairs, overdue credit cards, a sudden trip to reconnect with herself in Tulum. There was always a reason, and I had always played my part. Quiet financier, ever-loyal sibling, silent supporter of her curated delusion. Camille was the kind of person who could cry on cue and look beautiful doing it. She floated through life with the kind of glimmering, curated chaos that could only exist if someone else was shouldering the consequences. Our mother used to call her a sensitive soul, like that excused the way Camille screamed at waiters or ghosted friends who couldn't serve her immediate needs. When I tried to speak up, cautiously, tentatively, it always turned into a referendum on my mental health. I was too uptight, too sensitive, taking things the wrong way. Camille was a firework, they said, and I was a sponge soaking up shadows. Of course I couldn't understand her, so when I finally declined her request, just one word, a monosyllabic no with a full stop, there was a pause, the kind of eerie, heavy silence that always precedes an explosion. Camille didn't reply right away, and when she did, it wasn't to me. No, she went to the only stage she ever needed, the family group chat. "I'm worried about her," she typed, spinning the first thread of the web. "She's been really different lately. Withdrawn, erratic. She's not herself. I honestly think she might be mentally unstable. I just want her to get help." The quiet detonated. What followed was an avalanche. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly became armchair therapists. Aunts who'd never once remembered my birthday texted variations of "just checking in," their messages stinking of performative concern. My inbox filled with emojis of praying hands and links to articles about anxiety and mood swings, as if my refusal to fund Camille's latest indulgence could be diagnosed as a psychotic break. I watched, in real time, as my reality was rewritten by a woman who'd once fake-cried her way out of a speeding ticket and then bragged about it for a week. But here's what she didn't count on. I had receipts. Years of them. Screenshots, voice notes, emails, all carefully saved, tucked away not out of spite, but survival. I'd started documenting things 5 years ago when she lied to our parents about me borrowing money I never touched. I remembered the smirk on her face when I confronted her in private, her unapologetic shrug, and the flippant, "You know how easily they believe me." That moment calcified something inside me. So I started recording. Her screaming that I was useless when I wouldn't co-sign a lease, her emails demanding money before she accidentally exposed old family secrets, her late-night voice messages where she threatened to self-harm if I didn't Venmo her by morning, only to post clubbing photos hours later. It wasn't just her words, it was her tone, that theatrical, high-pitched cadence she used whenever she was performing sorrow, that saccharine veneer that cracked the second she wasn't getting her way. I had the proof of who she truly was, captured in digital permanence. Not a misunderstood woman, not a broken soul, just a predator with pretty teeth. So I sent it. To the same group chat she'd infected with her narrative, to the aunts and cousins and second cousins twice removed who had suddenly become mental health advocates the moment she played victim. I didn't include commentary, didn't preface the messages. I simply forwarded the files. Screenshots of her threats, clips of her screaming, emails with subject lines like, "Pay me back," or "I'm telling mom about your abortion," which was fictional, by the way, though she didn't know that. I included a chart too. Yes, a chart. Of every dollar I'd transferred to her accounts over the last 10 years. Itemized with dates and notes. The totals shocked even me. The silence afterward was deeper than before. No one responded for nearly a full day. Then slowly, the chat began to trickle with cautious disengagement. Someone changed the subject. Someone else left the group. The stream of concerned texts to me stopped altogether. No apologies, no acknowledgments, just retreat, like rats abandoning a ship that had been exposed as a stage prop. Camille never responded. Not directly. But her online presence shifted. Her usual stream of selfies and Manifest your dreams captions took on a strange, muted tone. She posted a black and white photo of herself in a blazer with the caption, "Healing isn't linear." Then another, "Strong women scare weak people." The motivational drivel came like clockwork, daily affirmations drenched in subtext. But she never addressed me again. I watched her from a distance, curious. She was back to pretending, back to curating. But I saw the tremble now, the subtle delay in her replies to comments, the way she'd delete posts with too many critical responses. There was no confrontation, no apology, no grand act of contrition, just the quiet implosion of someone who could no longer weaponize the illusion. And me? I lived. Not in the poetic, self-discovery kind of way that Instagram influencers chronicle. I mean, I actually lived. Without the constant tap of guilt at my spine, without bracing for another demand masked as desperation. I slept through the night, ate meals without glancing at my phone in dread. And, slowly, I began piecing back the fragments of identity I hadn't realized I'd given her. She called me unstable, but instability doesn't look like firm boundaries. It doesn't wear quiet dignity or wield truth like a blade carved from self-preservation. No, instability hides behind hashtags and fabricated narratives. Instability relies on a spotlight and a stage, and shatters in the absence of an audience. So let her post. Let her smile with her teeth too white to be real, and her captions too vague to be honest. She's watching, I know it. Watching my life unfold in the silence she once filled with shrieking demands. Watching me live a version of peace she never earned and can't imitate. The irony was that even in silence, Camille made noise. It was like she'd mastered the art of being present in absence, her shadow flitting through mutual spaces, subtle yet deliberate. She didn't block me, of course. That would be too final, too much like relinquishing control. Instead, she kept me close enough to see her pretend, distant enough to avoid accountability. I began noticing patterns. The passive-aggressive quotes escalated into veiled barbs. Some people need to play the victim because it's the only role they understand. Or, the real ones don't need to explain themselves, they just shine. Her captions weren't just for her curated audience anymore. They were missives, crafted for my eyes specifically, stitched with bitterness and fragility like a poorly hemmed costume. She still had her followers, her little digital cult of curated admiration, mostly strangers, old classmates who still remembered her as the prom queen who cried prettily during her speech, and random men who thought a filter and a bikini made a personality. They adored her because they didn't know her. They knew the version of Camille that she designed, not the woman who once told me with genuine irritation that crying kids were aesthetic pollution. That phrase alone had echoed in my mind for weeks afterward, not because it was cruel, though it was, but because it was so perfectly her. Everything to Camille was aesthetic, emotional expression, trauma, relationships, all filtered, arranged, and measured against how it looked from the outside. She had become a brand of herself, and brands don't crumble, they rebrand. That was the next phase of her quiet retaliation. Suddenly, she was launching something. A wellness blog, or maybe a podcast. It was unclear. She dropped vague hints. Big things coming. Healing is a journey, and I'm ready to share mine. She posted selfies with tear-streaked cheeks but perfectly contoured jaws, her caption bleeding with references to toxic energy and letting go of people who don't support your highest self. It was a performance, beautifully hollow, terrifyingly calculated. And the worst part? It worked. Her comments flooded with praise. "You're so brave. I needed to hear this today. Cut the toxic ones out, Queen." I didn't respond. Not publicly. What would I say that wouldn't make me look defensive? That wouldn't feed into her latest narrative, that I was bitter, broken, obsessed. She knew how to push just hard enough, how to weaponize suggestion and let the audience fill in the blanks. And they always did. But what Camille didn't know, what she never considered, was that I had begun building something of my own. Quietly, carefully. Not a platform. Not a brand. Just space. Real connections. I started meeting with a therapist. Not because of her accusations, but because I wanted to finally understand how I'd become so entangled in her chaos that I forgot to breathe without permission. My therapist called it covert enmeshment, a polite term for what was essentially emotional conscription. Camille never needed chains. She used guilt like silk soft and suffocating. And with every session I grew a little clearer, not angrier, not vindictive, just lucid. Lucidity has a taste, clean, cold, almost metallic, like the moment before a storm breaks. It's the kind of clarity that makes you look at old photographs and see the truth you missed before. Her hand gripping my wrist too tight in every family picture. Her eyes always on someone else's reaction, the way she never smiled unless she was being watched. I revisited it all with new eyes. The childhood games that always ended in tears if she lost. The teenage years where I covered for her lies, thinking it was loyalty. The adult years where her problems were mine, but mine were a burden. One afternoon, I received a message from our cousin Marla. The same Marla who once reposted Camille's Instagram story about cutting out negativity. She wrote, "Hey, I know this might be weird, but did Camille really send you those emails?" There was no greeting, no apology, just uncertainty, wrapped in the need to understand whether the pedestal they'd built for Camille had ever stood on solid ground. I didn't send more proof. I didn't need to. Instead, I replied with a single line. Every word she used was real, and I still remember how they made me feel. That seemed to be enough. Marla never responded, but 3 days later I noticed she unfollowed Camille. A small crack in the mirror, but a crack nonetheless. Then came the podcast, or, more accurately, her podcast, The Resilient Sister. I admit I laughed the first time I saw the promotional video. Black and white clips of Camille walking alone on a beach, wind whipping her scarf, overlaid with a voiceover dripping with faux sincerity. Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who've been betrayed by those closest to them. The first episode dropped with a thumbnail of Camille holding a mug that read, "Survivor," her eyes wide and glistening with implied tears. I listened. Out of morbid curiosity, maybe. Or maybe because I wanted to hear just how far she'd go. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. She spoke in vague shapes and implications. "Someone I once loved deeply turned on me," she said softly. "They tried to ruin me with lies, twisted my truth, made me out to be the villain in their story. But I forgive them, because they're clearly hurting." I sat with that. The hypocrisy curled like smoke inside me, acrid and impossible to ignore. Forgiveness, she called it, as if she were the one with wounds, as if she were the gracious monarch, bestowing absolution upon her exiled sibling. The audacity was almost impressive, but again, I said nothing. Because the more she talked, the more obvious it became to anyone listening that her narrative had holes, inconsistencies, cracks, and cracks deepened. She reached out once after that, a single text. "Camille, I think we should talk. I've been doing a lot of inner work, and I'd like to clear the air. Maybe record an episode together?" It was a trap, of course, wrapped in the illusion of peace but baited with exposure. She wanted to reclaim the narrative, reshape it through shared dialogue where she could twist every word into performance art. Turn me into a character in her redemption arc. I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it, because this wasn't about peace. It wasn't even about revenge anymore. It was about liberation, from the idea that I owed her a stage, a spotlight, or a second chance. Let her speak. Let her spin her version to the ones who still wanted to believe. Because the truth no longer needed to shout. Camille's podcast sputtered out by the 4th episode. Not that she ever acknowledged it. She simply stopped posting the usual countdowns, let the links fade into her grid of selfies and beachside, handed shots. Her once fervent declarations of truth-seeking and emotional healing went quiet, replaced with old tactics, curated photos, overly filtered dinners, wide smiles that didn't touch her eyes. It was like watching a failing actress forget her lines halfway through the performance and try to win the crowd back with a dance. But the applause had faded. What she never realized, what she could never allow herself to admit, was that her power had always relied on my silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of accommodation. The silence of stepping back so she could take center stage, of biting my tongue when she distorted the truth, of being the buffer between her chaos and the consequences it should have carried. And when I stopped doing that, when I simply said no, not loudly, not cruelly, just clearly, her world trembled. In the weeks after her message, the one dangling reconciliation like a poisoned olive branch, I felt something I hadn't known in years. Peace, without anticipation. There was no waiting for the next strike, the next manipulative plea wrapped in saccharine words. She had spent a decade building a cage around me made of guilt and history, and I had carried it like a duty. But cages rust when you stop reinforcing them, and eventually, they collapse. It was my mother's birthday that brought the final collision. A Sunday brunch Camille didn't know I'd be attending. She hadn't been invited, but Camille never needed an invitation. She simply appeared, like a bad song left on repeat, smiling too brightly, arms spread as if nothing had ever happened. "There she is," she cooed when she spotted me, her voice pitching upward in faux delight. "I was wondering if you'd come. I thought maybe you were still processing." I didn't flinch. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind too many times to stumble now. "I'm not processing anything, Camille," I said, calmly placing my glass on the table. "I've already closed the book." Her smile flickered, just briefly, like a theater light short-circuiting. But she recovered with her usual flair, letting out a soft chuckle and glancing around as if sharing an inside joke with invisible spectators. "Oh, come on," she said, lowering her voice to a confidential murmur. "Let's not do this in front of everyone. We're sisters. We've both said things, done things, but we rise above, don't we?" I leaned in, my voice low but crystalline. "You've said things. You've done things. What I did was finally stop letting you." A pause. A long one. And truly the first time Camille's smile didn't return. It wasn't rage that flickered behind her eyes. Not yet. It was something far more raw. Exposure. She realized in that exact second that I was done playing the part. That no amount of dramatic pauses or crocodile tears would shift the scene in her favor. She was alone on the stage now, and the spotlight wasn't flattering anymore. She muttered something, an excuse about needing to step out, and vanished down the hallway. She didn't return for the rest of the meal, and no one asked about her. The silence she once weaponized had turned against her. It wasn't absence. It was irrelevance. My mother, seated next to me, didn't comment, but she reached out and squeezed my hand once, gently, without looking at me. That was enough. Weeks passed, and Camille's presence began to dissolve like fog in the morning sun. Her posts grew infrequent. Her captions turned vague and melancholic. She even locked her account eventually, shutting out the strangers she once begged for attention. Her glow dimmed, not because of me, not because of any grand reckoning, but because it could no longer feed on the energy it used to devour. She was a queen with no court, a storm with no one left to drench. I sold the condo we used to share the lease on. Well, the one I paid for, while she occupied like a squatter with high-end taste. I deleted every backup message, cleared the digital graveyard of her apologies, threats, and empty promises. My therapist asked if I wanted to keep anything for safety, but I shook my head. I wasn't afraid of Camille anymore. I wasn't protecting myself from her. I had simply outgrown the battlefield she kept trying to drag me back to. My life settled into something startlingly ordinary. And in that ordinariness, I found something she never could. Authenticity. I started my own blog, not to perform, but to speak. Anonymously at first. Then under my name. I wrote about emotional resilience, about family dynamics, about learning to forgive. Not others, but yourself, for all the times you stayed silent. And people listen. Not with blind adoration, but with resonance. Not as followers, but as fellow survivors of quieter wars. One day, months later, I received a letter. A real one, handwritten. No return address. Camille's script. It was brief. Maybe one day you'll understand why I had to do what I did. Maybe not. I still think you could have handled things privately. But what's done is done. I hope you're happy. I'm trying to be. No apology. No acceptance. Just a final act. A curtain call that no longer needed applause. I didn't reply. I folded the letter, tucked it into a box labeled, "No longer yours," and set it in the back of my closet. Not out of sentiment, but closure. A relic. A receipt, if I ever needed to remind myself how far I'd come. And then I lived. Truly lived, without explanation, without guilt, without shrinking so someone else could appear larger. Camille would go on, I imagined. Recast herself again. New friends, new followers, a new mask to try on. Maybe she'd find someone else to sponsor her delusions, someone who hadn't yet learned the cost. Maybe not. It no longer mattered. She could tell her story however she wanted, because mine had ended, not with revenge, not with a confrontation, but with peace.